Hello and welcome to GeoBiz. We are at GeoSmart India 2016 and joining me for a discussion on BIM and Geospatial is Ankit Revo of Atkins, Abhay Kimmatkar of AADCC Infocad, Jugal Makwana of Aecon and Atanu Patnaik of Bentley Systems. Several years ago, in an award-winning paper at an AGI conference, Ann Kemp, the then head of GIS and infrastructure at Atkins Global, asked the question, BIM isn't geospatial or is it? That was about 6 years back. My question to my panelists would be the same. BIM isn't geospatial or is it as of today?
So the debate in the industry has been on, but when we look at this at a fundamental level, we understand that unless data is made accessible to all relevant stakeholders at a single source, it always is difficult to coordinate between data that is related to a building or to infrastructure at the surface level. So really to bring this data at a single source, make it accessible to all stakeholders is the key here. That's the crux. There are interoperability issues, there are technology platforms. I mean, we deal with that day in and day out. Having said that, at a conceptual level, we do understand that BIM and GIS have to coexist, especially in large township projects where you're dealing with large amounts of complex building data as well as underground utilities and infrastructure data on the surface.
How would you add to that?
So GIS has had a complete changeover from its inception. So we started with GIS and then we now call it a Geospatial technology. So it has its own life cycle from creating a 2D data, now it has converged into 3D data, and creating those data has now emerged as a technology. It has become an engineering. So there has been geospatial engineering and then there has been BIM. So BIM is conceptualized over the last 6 years or probably 8 years. So BIM has a basis of engineering data creation and geospatial has geospatial data creation. So when we started integrating on geospatial platform about this BIM data or the construction data, so that has integration and data convergence happening over there. So slowly this geospatial technology is moving and creating its own verticals. BIM is one of the verticals which we can have GIS as a base and BIM as a vertical on that.
Jugal, how would you add to that?
So when we talk about, let's say, building information management or geographic information system, information is at the center and at the core. And that is where the value of information is. So BIM is a process which kind of gathers that information for a certain workflow. GIS does the same way for a different context. What is important is that we are not yet at a stage where both of these environments are kind of integrated yet, but we are reaching there, and it will happen where the consumption comes at the forefront of information in terms of, and GIS and BIM will have different interfaces in how the information is consumed. So when consumption becomes a focus, that is when we would see a much tighter integration of both of these systems and synergize.
Atanu, you?
Yeah, so BIM for us is basically the building information modeling. The building is a verb and not a noun. So as Jugal mentioned, BIM is a process, and the project delivery organization, it should have a better performance through the breadth of information mobility and the better performance in asset management through the depth of information modeling. And any infrastructure project is not possible without geo coordination today. So when you ask the question whether GIS is part of BIM, yes, definitely it is, because every infrastructure project we do today is geo-coordinated. So both of them coexist.
But as Jugal also said that till the consumption drives the trend, theoretically we can agree that they should coexist. But is it actually coexisting? Is every BIM project GIS, not GIS, as in is all of that geospatial technologies, is it being part of it? Is every BIM project geo-coded?
Geo-coordination is at the core. Right, so every whether it's infrastructure or building or anything that we design or construct today is located somewhere on the earth. So geo-coordination is at the core. Now, how do we take it beyond that in a geospatial context will again depend on how it's being consumed. So that is where I say the consumption is the focus. So yes, geospatial and GIS are very much part of BIM, and they are an extension of the BIM processes. And currently the focus is more on information creation in a BIM world. And as we move towards the information consumption phase, that is when geospatial has to play a key role, because that would then be the front end for users. So currently, let's say all the map information that we consume is through a front end, a geospatial. And as at a city level scale or a large scale infrastructure project, map and geospatial or GIS becomes a natural extension of BIM as such.
How would you say to that, Ankit?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with what Jugal and Atul said. BIM is an intelligent model-based process where the information has to be managed across the life cycle of the project. And as Jugal talked about the consumption phase, that's where life cycle of the project becomes relevant, because like he said, we are so focused on design and construction at the moment, but eventually these assets have to be maintained and operated over their life cycle. And that's when owners and operators will need access to both the building information as well as the infrastructure information. So whether it is coming from BIM or from GIS, the data will have to be integrated, will have to be managed, and based on that information, owners are going to be taking informed decisions about asset management, about operations, about maintenance. So eventually, like my fellow panelists said, both the processes will have to coexist.
Abhay, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I will just add into that. As the technology advancement is happening and people are moving into precision side, so now a lot of new technologies is coming, like location based and even the indoor mapping. And so wherein geospatial and BIM will go hand in hand, because where you will stop with geospatial and where you will start with BIM, you will never know. As regards to indoor mapping, you can have a BIM model wherein asset management can be done, and even you can have an indoor map created out of LiDAR capture, and then it can definitely have integration between, because accuracy will be the key. So that you will never know how we are going from geospatial to BIM technology.
So are you seeing a specific business driver which is driving this trend from like de-geo BIM to a more geo BIM?
I'd like to take that up. Yes, the key business driver here are the owners or agencies which are maintaining and operating large assets. So I can speak for Atkins. We are working on some of the largest airport and infrastructure projects around the world, and we see this requirement coming from owners and operators of these assets, that they want to integrate GIS and BIM data, because when it comes to a large project like an airport, which has to be maintained over a period of time, they need the entire information to be available to them. And asset management as a practice, as a discipline, is going digital now, from the traditional manpower intensive facility management that we used to have. It's going more digital, and that's the key driver for this to happen, we believe.
Any of you would like to add to that?
Yeah, so as we are moving from immature market to mature market, wherein BIM has been mandated in some of the countries in West and in the eastern part, so people have started taking up, even the government has taken keen interest, because so they need a geocoding data, not only the BIM model, but they need a geocoded. So that's why BIM has been taken seriously by Western part, because as well as geospatial technology goes, for an utility, you need to know entire modeling, entire asset management based on the geocoded. So even municipalities have been taking this part seriously, so they wanted all building plan to be geocoded. Now even in India we have tried with BMC, or for that matter Navi Mumbai Corporation, so they have started taking plans which has been geocoded now. So they will now accept 3D model as well. Earlier they used to only do 2D and paper drawing, but they are now moving into, even in India, The trend has been started, but not the mandate has been come. But it will probably another 2-3 years we'll see that change happening in India as well.
Atanu, what do you think are the key drivers?
So basically today, when talking from the Indian perspective, it is the owner-operators who are driving it, and the major owner-operators who are actually trying to implement it first, who are the early adopters, are basically the metro projects. Because the projects are running fast, the cycle of the execution is quite low rather than the other big projects, and the agencies or the owners are also looking at the operation and maintenance of those infrastructure for the next 30 to 40 years. So that is the basic driver, because they are not looking at it only as a design house or an operation maintenance house. The data has to flow from the conceptual engineering stage right up to the maintenance and the operation stage. So that is the basic key driver why most of these metro projects are trying to adopt it.
You would like to add, Jugal?
Yeah, I think the key drivers are the same, whether it is BIM or GIS. One is to improve the efficiency, be more productive, and obviously for private entities to be more profitable. And the need for transparency is increasing. The need to use resources, whether it is natural resources or human resources or any resources, to use them more efficiently is the key. And that is where BIM and GIS are very much at the core of every project delivery. And as Atanu mentioned, it is right from the owners are driving it, not just at the initial project delivery phase, but want to ensure that the same benefits are extended through the life cycle of the project.
Do you think designers may already be using geospatial and GIS both, and they are just not calling it so because of lack of awareness? Or
Right, totally agree to that. People have been using it for last 5 or 6 years or even more. But the buzzword came right now, so that's how we are trying to qualify it.
Yeah, like in IoT, IT implementers do not know whether they are being known as a GIS implementer, but they use GIS. Like yesterday we had one session wherein some IT company was using GIS, but they are not aware that they are actually using GIS. So like same, construction engineering technology is also going with GIS, but they are not aware. Now people are catching up because they need more precision and they need more data and more information. So GIS have enabled all this to come in one single platform.
in the world of 3D data, I mean, the way I see it, it's drawn according to like your architecture model, and then your geospatial models are like something different. And often when you merge it, like they are not sitting on top of each other. Mostly because of lack of standards, interoperability, or are there any other issues that you would like to talk?
Antanu can also talk about this, but when we look at building information modeling, you are using a certain set of technologies. They are one of the key providers. And when you are looking at GIS data, you are looking at certain other set of technologies, and when you try and integrate, there are issues that you face. So while we sort of grapple with the technology part of it, but at a conceptual level, we all agree that data has to come together. It has to be made accessible across the life cycle of the project. Now, as go towards the mature end of the life cycle of many of these assets, we will realize that even though this data may not have been created initially on some of these platforms, there are owners and operators who are now asking for the data to be then converted and brought on a common platform, even though it may not have been used in the design stage when the asset was built. So that's another huge requirement that we see coming up in the market. Apart from that, when it comes to new projects, new asset development, we certainly have an opportunity. Urban designers, planners, they've already been using it. As you rightly said, they may not be calling it, they may not be using the buzzwords. And architects have also now sort of migrated from the traditional 2D conventional way of delivering design to BIM. And that migration is not just being driven by government mandates like in some of the countries, industry does realize that that's the future and that's the way to
Do
go.
you mean that the industry feels there is already a need for it for greater productivity or?
Yes, industry does feel the need, and it is our clients who are sort of driving that change, because when we work in Middle East and say other parts of APAC, we see that a lot of our clients are actually mandating this on our projects. So this is part of the RFP. This is a requirement which is coming from the client. So as an industry, we've reached a stage where this is no longer a choice. This is something which is being mandated.
Yeah, I would agree with Ankit, and it is, there is a need for standards, and the mandate do facilitate and help in terms of implementation. But as long as, let's say, the clients don't ask for it, typically it will be difficult for the supply chain to provide that information. So there is a need for standard, there is a need for increasing the awareness about that. There are technology challenges, but there are workarounds it, and obviously we actively work with all the leading vendors, technology vendors, and to help improve the interoperability, and that is certainly one of the key requirements. But the mandate and the need for that geo-enabled BIM information needs to be there in the first place, and that is what the clients drive as such, and we've seen that need being increased, not just, let's say, for metro project, but smart cities. So we are delivering various smart cities where BIM and GIS both are being mandated. So we are currently maintaining 2 sets of information with an hope that in future, when these technology merge and integrate, we would have one comprehensive database to offer to the city for further operations and maintenance of that entire city. So not just a metro or a city, and this is happening almost everywhere globally, not just in India where we see this smart city movement, but almost all the metros coming out, whether it's Middle East or Singapore or Malaysia or Hong Kong, all major infrastructure projects, airport or let's say metros and cities or plant projects, or all of these are now where they are mandating BIM and GIS, and both platforms are part of those mandates, so one has to integrate that.
But my question is why there is this, you mentioned there are these 2 sets of data, why there needs to be 2 sets of data, why can't it be one? If we agree that it needs to be integrated, that it needs to be Geospatial plus BIM, let it be one, like one Geo BIM data. Atanu, how?
No, like there are multiple vendors who are supporting the BIM initiative and the GIS initiative. So the formats from the different vendors actually changes. I know that companies like Atkins, Aecon, Mott, all of them have their BIM practices set up, but they have the flexibility to choose which software to use, which software they are comfortable with. So the onus doesn't lie with the project delivery organization, but the onus actually lies with the owner operators. They have to set the BIM processes, wherein whichever software or different products from different vendors which the project delivery organizations use, it has to come into their system and where the data quality check happens. And so the owner operated, for example, Reliance is doing the same thing. They have 15 different EPC companies working on their J3 project. Now they can't dictate and say that every EPC consultant should give the data in a particular format, which actually happens in the UK. In India, it is not that much of relevant. But Reliance makes it a point to get the data in a single format, gets the data quality check, and when it passes it on to its operation and maintenance team, it's one single database which actually talks to each other, which can be reused for operation and maintenance.
Exactly. Abhay, how would you?
Yeah, so interoperability is a key issue, like what Atanu's studying. So we have different vendors creating different data sets and different formats. But there is one more aspect I would like to add in. One is a mapping grade kind of data, and one is engineering kind of data. Like if you capture through a LiDAR, you get engineering grade data if a high accuracy equipment is used. Similarly, if you do laser grade equipment to capture those, so you will get that kind of data. So we need to reduce that gap, which is mapping grade and engineering grade. So that will definitely have that interoperability between the 2 systems, and it will talk to each other. Even though the technologies may be different, but time has come that these people have to mandate on that, or they have to inculcate some kind of technology wherein they should talk to each other.
See, when we talk about a mandate, there is already, like in some countries, there is a mandate. UK has a mandate for BIM, Netherlands has a mandate for BIM, Singapore has a mandate for BIM. Again, my question is, does that mandate specifically mention that it has to be GeoBIM or that two sets of data exist?
You see, mandates could be very generic. Now, say, I'll give you the example of, Dubai municipality. They've come up with a BIM mandate, and then there is a, another iteration of that which recently came out. But it is not very clear. It's very generic. It's sort of giving a message to the industry that BIM is something which is good to have. It's not a must-have. Or maybe they say that a building above 40 floors must submit a BIM model. Even what has happened in Singapore, and he can correct me on that. BCA came up with the mandate, and the industry stakeholders are doing meeting the minimum requirements of BCA. But are they really taking that and using that data across the life cycle? UK, there is a mandate. US, we know the General Services Administration. But when you look at all the stakeholders, there's the government which can mandate, there's the industry, then there's the technology companies, and then there are clients, owners. Now, government can do its bit, but I think it's up to the industry to really, educate the clients on what the systems and processes should be, how different technologies should work with each other, and really create a roadmap to create, BIM and GIS data and make it work together. Unless the industry takes that initiative and sort of, handholds the clients to go that path, because a lot of the clients are not fully aware. There is, still, they are evolving, their systems and processes are evolving. And this is a changing process, right? And that's where I believe that the key partnership here is the industry with the technology companies coming together and sort of, taking that proposal to the client that this is how we are going to implement it. And that may require some effort on their end, technology companies to start working with each other as well. Because, sometimes there are competition issues, and, something works with a vendor, doesn't work with another vendor. So there are those sort of micro level issues which need to be sorted out.
How much of it is happening, Jugal? This awareness raising by the industry?
One, just to extend what Ankit was mentioning about the mandate. So Singapore BCA is driving a BIM mandate, and that mandate is expanding across different organizations as well. And different organizations have different perspectives of the information which they need. And the overall mandate, like in Singapore, is to create a smart nation. So a smart nation needs smart information, and smart information comes out of different aspects of infrastructure development projects, as well as building projects and all other whatever is happening within the country. So there is a framework to integrate that information as it is developed. So Singapore is actually putting an effort and has created a guideline that all information which is now submitted to anyone has to be geo-coordinated and geo-enabled, so that it kind of fits it into the right place wherever it belongs to, and the nation becomes smarter by capturing that information and also capturing how that information changes and evolves on a day-to-day basis. And that awareness is certainly required. So that is, from a technology standpoint, it can be done. There are certainly challenges. Interoperability is one such challenge, but we can't wait for that to be solved completely. We have to have workarounds and to ensure that it fits in together. And awareness creation is one of the critical aspects where the client needs to be made aware that something like this is possible, the potential benefit of doing that. Singapore realizes the benefit, and that is why they are leading in that mandate. So they kind of mandated BIM in 2010 when no other country was willing to do that. The only project which has mandated BIM by then was Crossrail, which mandated in 2007. UK was on the roadmap, but that mandates get implemented only next year or the year after that. So that is where I guess once the client...
But again, the UK mandate is not as specific as the Singapore mandate when it comes to geocoding. Does it specify all that?
The mandate does specify guidelines on the focus of UK mandate is on the information, right? So the core information required, and geo coordination is certainly part of that. They might not have termed it as GIS, but it is very much an integral part of that information required.
Atanu, how would you?
Yeah, like UK, for example, has not even come out with the BIM level 2 mandate. They are using BIM level 2 as one part of the most advanced nations using BIM. But even today, they are only up to BIM level 2. But in India, when we go to any government agency, they are expecting us to deliver BIM level 3 or 4, which practically is not possible right now. So we have to come up with a process wherein the set of rules which the government should accept, and so it might take around 4 to 5 years. Even though the projects can come up, a particular project, but as a nation coming up with a BIM specific notification, it would take time.
How is the industry as a whole reacting to this, Abhay?
As my panelists already mentioned that this particular is driven by industry, and government has now started mandating, not in a country like India, but industry has enabled this entire BIM technology to evolve and to use. So it is demand by them, and then technology has evolved. The technology partners like Bentley, they have shown that how this technology can be adopted, and then how people can use it. Slowly, I think it will have a people's mandate coming, and government will enable it to use it globally. Slowly, countries are catching up, and people will definitely adopt it in more period of time.
It is often said that engineers and geospatial people have different perspectives. So geospatial people are considered as scientists, and engineers are people who deal with doorknobs and screws. Is that true? Is there a way
No,
to?
I don't agree, because unknowingly most of the engineers have automatically adopted the GIS technologies. So in the previous discussion when we mentioned whether people are aware that they are using GIS, it's similar to engineers. They have been using GIS for long now, and it's part of all the projects which they do.
No, I guess as a civil engineer, one of the first things which I was taught in civil engineering was land surveying, which is very much part of geospatial. So I won't really agree that engineers, it's just that again, the information, the attitude or the approach differs on how an engineer uses a certain information and how a geospatial engineer or a GIS professional would use that information. So yeah, the perspective are different in terms of how both of them see information.
Ankit?
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm an architect by background, so I'm more sort of biased towards buildings rather than geo information. But having said that, it all boils down to who the stakeholder is and what their requirements are. Engineers have certain specific requirements, and that's how they leverage information. GIS professionals who are completely focused on that side may want those information in a different format, may use it differently. So, but that's all right. The idea is that multiple stakeholders should come together and leverage this at a process level.
Yeah, so GIS has not remained as only a GIS thing. So that's as made an introductory remark. GIS has moved from GIS to geospatial technology. So engineering has come into picture, and so we all engineers have now come into this technology. So we have an engineering perspective looking into the geospatial technology. So that is the difference which has made. So GIS not remain what it used to be. So it has definitely got an engineering perspective coming in.
So what data standards and interfaces that needs to be worked on to get this integration?
Common data standards are certainly required in terms of currently the BIM standards or the as we say the common information file formats that we have look at it just as a vertical entity. GIS standards look at it more from a horizontal standpoint, right, on how that. So there is a need for amalgamation of both of these to ensure that they fulfill the need of both BIM and GIS together. And I guess some efforts are being made in integrating that information in the city GML structure but it is very difficult because the requirements are different, needs are different for both of these. Information consumption is also different in terms of how a building information model information is consumed, let's say, or used at a design stage or a construction stage is different than how a GIS information is used at an operation and maintenance stage, and how again that information is used at the design stage. So we have to create commonalities between that when we go towards creating a standard, in terms of see what are the common interfaces and where the information needs to reside in the same platform to help, and also appreciate where the information could be segregated and consumed differently.
Yeah, but I have a small question or observation. Who do you think is best positioned to define these standards? Because we tend to be in a situation where all stakeholders look at each other when it comes to standards. It's a sensitive subject and we sort of expect the government to define it for us. Who really should define these standards?
These standards actually has to, again, industry is one of the core partners, vendors, organizations like Geospatial are also part of that. But I strongly believe that these standards have to be federated further. We cannot come up with a single standard saying this is a smart city standard, right? We have to look at it in a much smaller system. So we could look at, let's say, utilities as a system and come up with a standard for utilities, which could include BIM and GIS both. And otherwise, it will be very difficult to come up with a city-wide standard. So like what City GML is trying to do is good, but it has to be further narrowed down, because the way each of these industries are moving is difficult. Now, utilities are more focused on performance-driven information management, and they want fail-safe systems. They want to use it to understand how the system is performing, whereas a road infrastructure works differently. They look at more on a congestion, let's say, how the roads are performing at peak hours and non-peak hours, what are the alternatives, how to smooth traffic. So each of these requirements are different, right? So one has to narrow down those and look at those entities and separately when coming up with these standards.
But in that, if we go in federated manner, okay, we can get a country-specific standards created. But globally, it will be again a challenge, because.
But this word global and the word international. Now, my humble submission on that is that while I completely agree with industry-specific standards, utilities, buildings, infrastructure, above ground, below ground, but I believe there is a need to localize these standards also. What may be relevant in East Coast in the US may not be relevant in India, right? So when it comes to localization of these standards, I think it is the local bodies that have a real role to play, and customize, while the best practices we take from them, but we then customize these standards to meet our requirements and localize them.
Localizing, before we localize the standards, we have to localize the performance criteria. I guess that is what differs in terms of no one would want a utility network which does not work, right? Every city wants that they should have a water network, that every citizen, when they turn on the tap, they get the water that they need. Now, how that water reaches to that individual or to that citizen is not something that the standard can define on its own, but there has to be performance-driven criteria. So that is when, let's say, when we talk about US, or let's say you talk about New Jersey, the criterias are different because of, let's say, the atmosphere, climate, and the other structure, the governance structure that they have, and we have a different governance structure. At the end, all of us want the same thing. So that is where I guess the performance criteria have to be first localized, and the standards can then be adopted or adapted to those performance criteria.
Anthony, you want to add to that?
I agree to it, because today we are far away from setting up these standards. There is no association which is actually working on standards. Like, it has to be a combination of academicians, industry, government, as well as technology providers. But that is not happening today, because the need of the hour is that first we have to give a 24/7 water supply. That is what the government is looking at currently. So if you go back to them and say that we want you to set up standards for this, we don't get time.
Or opening up a
Yeah.
canal, which is
Yeah. So still, but some of the associations have started working on it, like Association of GIS Industries. They work very closely with the different government entities to try and see how we can take it forward.
Association organizations like OGC, I guess, Building Smart, they have been working in this field. What would you be?
Yeah, so Building Smart and OGC are working together on the city GML, trying to integrate, let's say, IFC and GML, city GML as an common data kind of format which can support the needs of different industries and fulfill the requirements of BIM and GIS as a workflow as well.
You want to add?
No.
No, but what more that they can do?
No, at a, organizations like Building Smart and they've been very active in this area, but I think more industry participation is required. I think the industry leaders are already doing it, but now it has to sort of percolate to the next level, where the local agencies, the local bodies, the smaller consultants who drive most of the local projects, smaller local projects also sort of participate. So, and the key thing here is the stakeholder buy-in. How do we get all the stakeholders to buy in into a standard, into a process? Because like we said, it has to be localized, the performance criteria has to be agreed. And sometimes getting that buy-in, getting all the stakeholders on board could be the biggest challenge.
Abhay, who do you think should be leading this initiative on formalizing standards or even working towards a model?
I have some different take, like what Atunu was suggesting, that I totally agree with him. In a country like India, we have extremities, like we do not have a basics, like you do not get a water in the tap, and then people have gone on to technologies and now talking about the standards. So that is also a need of the hour. But so we need to even bridge the gap. This, and as far as addressing that issue of who should take that mantle. So definitely we have an associations as Smart Cities, Smart India, and even AGI is working on that. So these people can definitely take, even geospatial media kind of people, they should come forward, and at least they do not have any interest in going into the businesses. So these people should take up and then create some kind of a platform to at least have a discussion on the same.
How would you summarize this debate, Jugal?
Well, I think there's certainly a need for an integrated GIS and a BIM approach, and that is where I'm hoping that we see more focus on information. First, information creation, information accumulation, and maintenance and management of that information, and then consumption of that information. So, at the core, the need is to look at information as one entity. And BIM and GIS are kind of two flavors which provide to that information, and then we have to see how that information can get consumed, and that is where the standards and all the initiatives need to focus on that core information. And that is like within Aecon, we recently started a new initiative looking at how we can integrate these different information created at different stages of the project into an intelligent information which can then be consumed and used at the operation and maintenance stage, or not just operation and maintenance stage, but how that information can be used at the construction stage or even at a design delivery stage. So that is where I think whether it is AGI or OGC or Building Smart, everyone needs to come together to figure out what is the right information and how that should be created and managed and used.
Atanu?
Yeah, so the owners need to understand that the information, when it is passed on to the operation and maintenance, of course there is saving in the design and the construction phase, the project get executed in time. But the major benefit comes at the OPEX phase, wherein the same information is used for the operation and maintenance. So we need to educate the owners on this so that they would mandate the use of BIM and GIS in most of their new projects.
Abhay?
Yeah, as I said, industry has already taken it, the owners of developing or adopting that. In my opinion, government has to take up initiative to at least mandate or at least go with BIM initiatives to avoid the project overruns, cost overruns. Only BIM can cut their costs and do the projects on time, and they have realized that. So whatever government projects like smart cities or for that matter metros, at least they should start geocoding. They should use geospatial and BIM as a technology to implement their project. So that should be the mandate, or that should be the strategy they should have. The government should have.
Ankit, how would you summarize this issue?
As technical consultants, we understand that 80% of the cost of an asset lies in the operations and maintenance stage. And as Atnu was saying, that owners and operators are focused on how this cost can be managed over a period of time. So as information flows from design to construction to O&M, in the past we've seen that there has been sometimes dilution of some of this information. So we as a company are really focused on ensuring that every time a project moves from one phase to another, the information is transferred in a format which is then well understood by those stakeholders who need to manage it in the subsequent phase. And our digital engineering vision for the company sort of focuses on that part. So we are happy to work with different stakeholders. In the UK, we are already advising the government on the BIM strategy. We are part of the BIM task force, and we are doing that in other parts of the world as well. And to summarize the debate, I believe all stakeholders need to come together and work on it. That's the key.
That would be all. Thank you. Thank you so much.